Hi everyone, and welcome to House of Binding. My name is Ivy, and today I'm going to show you how to take a set of pattern blocks that are printed on standard paper and transfer them to heavyweight manila paper to create hard copies that can be used while drafting your own designs. Transferring to manila will allow us to more easily trace and manipulate the blocks through the process of pattern making. This will be a detailed process of stapling your paper pattern template to manila, cutting, transferring all notches and drill holes, and finally labeling all the blocks with the necessary pattern information. First off, what are blocks? Blocks, also sometimes called slopers, are basic pattern pieces that serve as the starting point for all designs created through the process of pattern making. Blocks are created to be the most basic, fundamental shapes in a tailored garment, completely devoid of all design details. A pattern maker will take a set of well-fitting blocks, trace them, manipulate them into the desired design, then seam allowance is added, and it can finally become a complete pattern that can be cut and sewn into a garment. I'm going to be demonstrating this process today with my custom wolf form pattern blocks. I have these available for purchase in the House of Binding Pattern Boutique, which I'll give a link to below. I have a few different styles and fit variations of blocks available, but the process I'm going to be showing you today can be applied to any of those or any other set of blocks that you have. All of my block sets or patterns are available either as wide format printouts that I print out and mail to you, or as PDF downloads that you can print and assemble yourself on 8.5 by 11-inch paper at home. I'll be demonstrating everything today on one of the wide format printouts, but again, this process will all be the same regardless of the format of your blocks. I have a couple sets of blocks that are single size only, but if you're using one of the multi-size block sets like the one shown here, then you're going to want to start by looking at the included measurement chart and selecting the correct size that you plan on using to create your set of blocks. Then you can proceed by either cutting directly on the size and color-coded line for the size that you'll be using, or what I highly suggest doing is taking some transparent or translucent pattern paper and tracing off a separate copy of the size you want to transfer. That way you can keep your original template with all the sizes intact and just use the traced copy to cut from the manila. Let's get started. Here are the tools you're going to need. You'll need your pattern block template. You will also need manila paper, sometimes referred to as oak tag. My manila comes in a 60-inch width, and it took about 2.5 yards to transfer one of my larger pattern sets, like the wolf form or alva form that have 9 pieces. If you're using a different set of blocks, then that length may vary a bit. You will also need pattern shears or other really strong scissors capable of cutting heavyweight paper smoothly, a pattern notcher, and all black and red felt tip pens, a stapler, be sure it's heavily stocked with staples, as well as a staple remover, a drafting ruler. I tend to use this clear grid 2x18-inch ruler for a lot of things. And this is an optional tool for a technique that I'll show near the end, but you may want to have some double-sided tape as well. To begin, you're going to take your paper template, and we just want to roughly cut around all of the pieces to separate them. This will make it easier for us to place them exactly where we want to on the manila because they don't have to stay in this original configuration. In the interest of saving a little bit of paper today, since we do tend to use a lot of wasted paper in this process, I'm actually just going to be demonstrating on 3 specific pattern pieces that will allow you to see all the techniques you need to. But again, just note that this process will all be the same and you're going to be applying it to all of the blocks in your set. So I'll just take my pattern shears and leave a little bit of a white paper border. I'm not cutting on the lines yet, I'm just roughly cutting around them to separate. Next, you'll need to cut a piece of manila. I'm working off a manila that is 60 inches wide, so I did mention that a 2.5 yard cut is a good amount for the full block set of 9 pieces, but since I'm only demonstrating on 3 pattern pieces today, mine's going to be a little bit smaller. Next, we'll be folding the manila, and the manila has to be folded in a very specific direction because manila actually has a grain to it, just like most fabrics. Typically, The direction of the fabric that we call the lengthwise grain is the direction of the fabric that runs parallel to the selvages, or the outer finished edges of the fabric. And the grain of the manila operates in pretty much the same way. You're going to look for the outermost clean edges of the manila, where it gets rolled up lengthwise on a roll. Those edges also indicate to us that that overall direction is the lengthwise grain of the manila. We're going to be taking our big piece of manila today and folding it in half so that we create a fold that is in that lengthwise grain direction, as in the fold needs to be parallel to the outer clean edges of the paper, not the crosswise cut edges where you came across and cut it with scissors. Now this may feel a little bit cumbersome, so bear with me, but I'm going to try to unroll this section that I just cut. And of course, it's a little bit tedious because it's going against the direction of the roll. I'm going to bring my outermost clean edges of the paper together, and that will create a fold that is in the same direction as those clean edges, meaning the fold is also in the lengthwise grain direction of the manila. But before I even perform that fold on this larger piece of paper, I want to show you why that grain direction is so important on a couple sample pieces. So here's two smaller pieces of manila that I've already cut, and I've even labeled both of them with a grain line. That's this long double-ended arrow marking. I've placed the grain line in the correct lengthwise grain direction of the paper. On this first piece, I'm going to fold it in the correct direction, the direction that we'll be doing on your larger piece. So that means I'm bringing the lengthwise grain edges of the paper together so that the fold that I create over here is parallel to all of those directions. And when I fold it, I'm going to end up with a very sharp, crisp fold, which is always our goal when we're folding any sort of paper in pattern making, because a crisp fold is more accurate at the end of the day when we're lining it up to other things in our pattern drafting process. Now, just to show the opposition to that, here's my other piece, and I'm going to fold it in the incorrect direction. If I fold my manila like this, to where I'm creating a fold that is perpendicular to the actual lengthwise grain direction of the paper, not sure how well it'll show up on camera, but I do urge you to try this at home to see for yourself. The fold that I get here is actually kind of chunky and lumpy. It's not really a sharp, crisp fold because the paper truly does have fibers that run in the lengthwise grain direction, and it's much more easy to create a sharp fold when your fold is parallel to those fibers. So again, this is the incorrect direction. This right here is what we're going to be going for now on our larger piece of paper as I try to wrangle it and create a crisp fold in the lengthwise grain direction. Here's my large piece of manila, and this is the direction that it came off of my larger roll, which means the outermost edges on the right and left sides of where my hands are the lengthwise grain edges, and I need to bring those two edges together to create a fold that is parallel to them. You can see this is not the most graceful process, so bear with me. It does help if you have something heavy on hand, like your pattern shears, to weigh down one edge. Okay. There we go. The worst part is truly getting it started. I'm now at the point where I've brought my lengthwise grain edges together over here. So therefore, on this side, I'm going to be creating a fold that is parallel to the lengthwise grain direction of the paper. Before I actually crease that fold, I want to try to line up these lengthwise grain edges of the paper as best as I can. And now that these edges are lined up, I'm going to come all the way over here and smooth my paper into a nice fold. Now, even though I've gone ahead and just creased this by hand already, we can make that fold even sharper and more crisp. You've already learned by now that I love a crisp fold. So I'm going to turn it so the fold is facing me now. And I always say just grab a tool of choice because you're going to have many sewing tools lying around that you can use for this. I like to use my pattern notcher and just take one of the handles and run it along the crease to make it even sharper. Oh yeah, now that is a nice fold. Now that I have my fold in place, I'm going to take my stapler and just staple the layers together a little bit around the edges. That'll help keep the layers held together more evenly. I'm going to turn it in this direction and first staple all along the two clean edges that I brought together. You can just do your staples about every 6 inches apart or so. Make sure that the paper is sitting smoothly and not bubbling up. And you may notice that my edges are not perfectly matched over here. They may slide a little bit off track while you're folding, and honestly, that's really okay, as long as they're pretty close. As I turn it around and we look at this right here, you can see that these edges of the paper are not anywhere near to being matched. This is where I came along with my scissors and just cut right across at kind of a wonky angle. That's okay if the cut edges of the paper do not match when you fold it. But I do suggest coming in and trimming some of the excess single layer away so that as we move on, you'll be sure of where your manila is truly double layered. You don't want to miss a layer from a piece being shorter if it's on the underlayer. After I've evened out those edges, we'll add a few staples there as well. Same thing on this side. See if I peek underneath, my underlayer is shorter. I don't want to accidentally miss it, so we're just going to trim the top to even it out a bit. And staple. Now that the manila has been stapled around the edge, it's helping to hold those layers together, just like a big manila taco. And you can see how that's also helping to combat the curling of the paper. It's sitting a lot more flat now, so we can proceed. In case you're wondering why we fold and double the manila, blocks should always create the entire garment, including both the left and right sides. Basic blocks will typically default to being for a garment that opens in the back, which means that any pattern piece that's made for the back of the garment, like the back bodice or the back skirt, is broken into 2 separate halves to create the left and right, as if there were a zipper running through the center. Any piece that's made for the front of the garment, like the front bodice or front skirt, should be created as one continuous piece where the right side gets mirrored over a fold line to create the left side. Just note that even though this is the format for blocks, this can be changed when you're actually drafting your design from them if you intend for your garment to open on the front instead of the back. With that said, all of our blocks need to be doubled as we create our copies on the manila, either as 2 separate pieces or as one continuous piece that is mirrored over a fold line. Taking a look at all the pattern pieces in your block set, you'll see that every piece is labeled with a cut number in the pattern information. Every piece in your set will be labeled either as a cut 2, like the sleeves, or any piece made for the back of the garment. See, here's my back bodice, also says cut 2, or it will be a cut 1 that also has this CF fold indicator right here, which is meant to tell you that the line that it's pointing to needs to be placed directly on the fold of the manila as you attach it. I'm going to start by just sort of roughly placing the pieces as we talk about a couple more criteria for placement. The first thing that you'll always be considering, as I mentioned, is the cut number of the pieces, whether it's a cut 2 or a cut 1 that needs to go on the fold. The other piece of information that we need to take into account as we place is the grain line or overall grain direction of the pieces in relation to your manila paper. Every pattern piece will be labeled with a grain line, which is this long double-ended arrow, and that means that it should be placed on the manila with the grain line running parallel to the lengthwise grain of the manila. In this case, that means the grain lines should also be parallel to the fold that you've created. So let's start by just looking at how we're going to place any of our cut 1 pieces that need to be on a fold. I still have some excess paper surrounding the piece here, but I find that it's helpful if you come to the long dashed line with the CF fold indicator and fold the excess paper back so that you're making a physical fold on the dashed line that you can accurately match to the fold on the manila. You really want to crease this as accurately as possible. So now that I have that excess to the back, we can perfectly align this fold with the fold of the manila. I'm going to start by doing that right here. I want to match the folds as accurately as humanly possible. And when everything is lined up, we're going to be stapling this piece in place on the manila. But first, let's also talk about how to place any of the pieces that aren't meant to go on the fold, which is anything that's a cut 2. As I take a look at my back bodice block and my basic sleeve block, they too have grain lines, and these pieces need to be placed so that the grain lines are still parallel to that overall lengthwise grain direction of the manila, which means parallel to the fold, but you won't be placing any edge of this piece directly on the fold of the manila. You always want it to be backed away from the fold and from any of the edges, because the idea is that we're going to cut all the way around the perimeter of these cut two pieces, and thus we would actually end up with two separate pattern pieces as opposed to the ones that are on the fold and will only result in one pattern piece that's mirrored on the fold. That means my back bodice can go probably right about here. I don't have any other pieces that can fit over in this area of the manila, unfortunately, so that means my sleeve will have to sit a little bit higher than everything else. I just want to be sure that when I go to staple it, that its grain line is also parallel to the lengthwise grain. While it may be tempting to turn some of your pieces in this direction to get better paper yield, it's still not advised, because in true industry standard tradition, you must have the grain lines of all your blocks following the grain of the manila paper. So that means my sleeve needs to sit in this direction. Once we have a rough idea of how everything is supposed to be placed on the manila, now we can go ahead and start stapling them in place. I typically like to staple any of my pieces that need to be on the fold first, because they can be the most finicky and you need to be the most precise with their placement. So I can even scooch these other aside for the moment. I'll turn my manila and my first block so that it's facing me. Again, I want to really be sure that I accurately match up the folds of both papers, because even if the template of the block is backed away from the fold by, let's say, a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch, you're adding that much measurement times 2 to the overall circumference of your garment. And we do not want that to happen at all, so get them right on top of one another. And once I'm sure that they're nicely matched up, it does help if you even use something heavy, like your pattern shears, to hold the block in place. We're going to be stapling at the top and bottom of the fold line, as well as continuing to staple around the perimeter of the pattern piece every 6 inches or so, maybe every 4 to 6 inches actually, and being sure to get any key corners as we staple. If you're using one of the multi-size patterns, then you'll also want to know ahead of time which size you plan on cutting, because you want your staples to be just inside of those cut lines. I'm going to be cutting the size 6 blocks today, so my staples just need to be a little bit inside those lines. If you were cutting size 16 or 18, then your staples will be a little bit further out and closer to those cutting lines, but still inside of them. So I'll do my first staple right here where the neckline meets the fold, and then come all the way down to the bottom end of the fold at the waist and staple there as well. Then, as I mentioned, we do want to keep adding more staples around, so I can turn my manila and maybe come in from the waistline here. One staple at the dart, one right here, but I'm gonna have problems getting to any of these remaining areas because my stapler can't reach. So unless you have a long reach stapler to help you out with this, you're going to have to be roughly cutting the manila away as you go, just to allow your stapler to get in closer and do its job. So I'll use my pattern shears. We're still just rough cutting. We're not cutting exactly on the lines yet until everything is secured. Now that it's separated from the rest of the manila, I can go ahead and add a few more staples and be sure that your layers are nice and smooth and you don't have one of the manila layers bubbling up in between. And just proceed to add more staples around the perimeter of the piece. And these are truly just to keep all the layers intact so that you get nice, accurate cutting. So as we look around, I'd say this is a pretty good number of staples for this piece. Now we can move ahead and staple the others as well. After you've stapled all of your pattern pieces in place, now it's going to be time to actually cut them directly on the line for the size of your choice. You're going to be using your pattern shears and doing the most accurate, smooth cutting imaginable. I'm going to start with my back bodice right here. Of course, it doesn't matter which piece you pick first. And a couple tips for cutting as we go. If you're using heavy pattern shears like this, you want to be sure that you always keep them resting on the surface of the table as you cut. Their weight is what gives them such a smooth, stable cut, but they can be quite heavy and harder to manage if you're holding them in the air while trying to cut. So keep them resting on the table. I'm just gonna come in from the top of my center back line. And as I cut this first straight line here, I wanna be taking long, smooth strokes whenever possible. And I wanna be sure that I'm also bringing my shears all the way in to the previous cut each time I move forward. This is what's gonna keep you from having jagged edges in your cuts. So always advance them forward as far as possible before you continue. I'll just work my way around one section at a time. Be sure that you're following the same size line throughout all your cutting. Now, so far, most of the lines you've seen me cut have been pretty straight-ish, but we're coming up on a curve. So let's talk about cutting curves. Some of the trickiest parts to cut will be the armhole and the neckline. So my suggestion for cutting curves on Manila when you're using the heavy pattern shears is, rather than taking your shears and trying to curve them to follow the shape of the pattern, keep your shears in one place and turn your pattern into the shears. This will give you a smoother cut on the curves, and you'll have a lot more control over what you're doing. So I'm gonna keep my shears in one spot, and notice how I'm turning the pattern instead of the actual shears. And this will keep those curves nice and smooth. One more little curve at the neckline. I'm gonna go ahead and continue cutting out the remainder of my two pieces. You, of course, will have a few more than this if you're doing a whole set of blocks. After cutting out all of your pieces, the next step is going to be to clip the notches. You're going to take your notcher tool and look for any of these little thick dash lines that you see hitting the edge of your pattern piece on the line you cut. And we're gonna clip a notch exactly in the same position and direction of the notch markings. So we just clip right on the notch. Those are for the dart legs. One's here on the armhole. Couple more up here. Now, these ones that you've seen me clip so far are actually pretty straightforward, but there's a couple extra notches on your blocks that require some special attention. I'm talking about any of the notches that have been placed on the fold line of any of your pieces that are sitting on the fold. So this is usually at the top and bottom of your front bodice, as well as just at the top of your front skirt. You're gonna look for the notch marking. So on my front bodice here at the waistline, I can see my color-coded notch mark at the waist, and there's also a black one at the very top. This notch is marked in black simply because it's a shared notch for all of the same sizes. We need to clip both of these, but the goal with these notches that are placed on the fold is we want these to look like a single perfect width notch if our pattern piece were unfolded. Since we're notching it while the piece is still secured in its folded shut position, we need to take our notcher and place it on the fold so that we're only clipping half the width of the full notch so that it will open up and be like one full normal width notch. So I'm just gonna come right to my fold line, and I know this is a little tricky, but I wanna sort of stagger it on the fold and just remove the tiniest bit of paper. Both the bottom as well as up here, the little black one at the neckline. Now, just to give you a little better example of the goal with cutting these notches, I have another little sample piece of Manila, and it's been folded. I'm gonna show you an example of proper notching on the fold as well as improper notching on the fold. And this all has to do with potentially placing your notcher tool too far past the actual fold when you notch. So first, let's do a correct notch on the fold where I hold it just about like this. When I cut this notch, now you should see that as I open up, I have one standard size, just normal looking notch. The danger that you may run into as you're getting used to doing this, and it's not the end of the world, but just something to look out for, is holding your notcher tool too far past the fold when you cut. If I cut too far past the fold, then when I open it up, I'm going to end up with this thick, chunky notch that may even have a little tag left over in the middle. You don't want a chunky notch. You want a standard, normal size, pretty notch. On many other patterns where your piece is unfolded, then of course, the way to get a perfect size notch is to notch it while it's just unfolded. But for our blocks, they're being secured in that folded position. So if you're notching it while it's folded, then you have to stagger the notcher tool over just like that. Next, we're going to transfer all of the drill hole markings on your blocks by using an awl. Okay, the awl is meant to just poke a small little hole in your patterns. So you're going to look for any of the marks on your blocks that are this little circle with sort of a plus sign in the center. That's the drill hole, and our goal is to poke a tiny hole right in the center of it that goes through to our manila. Now, as we do this, the goal is to create a hole that is only large enough for the tip of your pencil to poke through later on when we're marking them on paper. So you don't want to actually push the awl all the way through to the thickest part. That would create a hole that's too large and not as accurate when you're trying to mark it later on. So just teeny tiny holes. Taking a look at my front bodice here, I have drill holes to mark at the tips of each of the darts as well as the apex. I'm going to take the tip of my awl, place it right in the center of the drill hole, only the one for the size that I have. And while you have it pressed down, reach underneath with your fingertips and just carefully push your paper up onto the awl. Sometimes it helps if you give a little kind of twist to get it started. And there we go. We just poked a tiny hole. Now if I flip it over, I'm going to show you how far I pushed my awl through. It's only about 1/4 of an inch past the tip of the awl. I didn't push it all the way onto the thick part. So go ahead and repeat this process for all the drill holes in your set of blocks. Before we go ahead and unstaple the paper top layer from our pattern pieces to do our complete labeling, let's talk about the grain lines. As I mentioned earlier, all of your pattern pieces are marked with a grain line. That's this double-ended arrow placed on every single piece, and we need to end up with those grain lines marked on our finished manila blocks as well. Any of your pattern pieces that contain the center front or center back lines of the garment, which basically means all of the bodice and skirt blocks, these all have the grain lines positioned exactly 1 inch away from the center front or 1 inch away from the center back. So I find it's almost easier to just use your ruler to mark these properly with pen after we've removed the paper on the top, because they just have a specific measurement from an edge of the piece, 1 inch away. However, I need to talk about your sleeve. We need to do a process to transfer the sleeve's grain line before we remove the paper. As we look at our sleeve, you can see that this grain line is not positioned parallel to or a set measurement away from any of the edges of the piece, but it does need to end up in this exact position on your completed block. So we need to transfer this grain line placement through to the manila by also using your awl. However, when we use the awl this time, we're not trying to actually puncture a hole the same way we used it to mark your drill holes. Instead, we're just going to make a tiny pinprick in a few locations, almost like you're just making a little indentation through to the manila rather than poking a full-on hole. So keep your block resting on the table. There will be no lifting up from below. Have it on a nice hard surface, and use the tip of your awl to just prick along your grain line at 3 or 4 places. And then when we remove our pattern paper, we'll be able to see those tiny imprints and just connect them with a straight line using our ruler afterwards. So right down here, I'm just going to get the tip of my awl right on part of the grain line, not the arrow, just the actual length of the line, and just kind of lean it up and push down. I'm not making an actual hole, I'm just making a little dent. And I'm going to repeat that at 3 or 4 spots along the main length of the grain line. And I recommend flipping it over to the other side that doesn't have the paper attached. And you want to be sure that you can see a teeny tiny pinprick. If you see absolutely nothing, then go back and do it again a little more aggressively. If your intended use for these blocks is simply home or personal use, then you can honestly just leave the paper attached on top if you'd like, because we have all the labeling here that we need. We have all of our pattern information and grain lines present, but I'm actually going to go ahead and move along and show you the true industry standard technique for labeling the blocks, where we can't just leave a piece of paper attached because we need to be labeling things on both sides of the pattern. I'm going to be using a staple remover now to remove all of the staples just so we can take the top sheet of paper off. But at the same time, we don't want to completely let our layers of manila disconnect from one another. We want to keep them as perfectly aligned as they were during the cutting process. So that means I'm going to remove each staple one at a time, peel the paper back, and replace it in the same or a similar spot on the manila only. Just come remove staple. You could probably even remove a few in each section at a time. Like I could take off 3 or 4, but no more than this. I just want to pull my paper up, bring the stapler back in, and reattach the layers of manila together. So here's my back bodice block, and here's the original paper template. I do highly recommend hanging on to your original copies and not tossing them. You never know if you need to refer to them for more information or make another set later on. So I do recommend keeping these for your records, but we'll continue on and do our labeling on the manila copy only. As I move along to my front bodice here, I want to show you an optional technique as opposed to keeping staples around the edge of your piece to holding them together. Typically in most pattern rooms, you will see the blocks just like this. Lots of staples around the edges. It's pretty common and standard practice. However, this is just a personal preference of mine. When I go to trace my blocks and there's staples around the edge, I find that makes them sit kind of lumpy, and it makes it harder for me to get an accurate trace job, especially if I'm moving really quickly. Sometimes your pencil will sort of slip underneath where the paper bubbles up from a staple being there. So my little extra tip is, rather than using staples to hold my layers together, I like to use double-sided tape. That gives you a really smooth, flat block that is really easy to work with later on, and you also don't end up accidentally running your hands over the top and snagging them on staples either. So let me just show you that for a little bit on my front bodice block. I'll start by removing a few of the staples. Okay, there's my paper. But now, instead of stapling the layers of manila together, I'm going to take the double-sided tape and place a few pieces following the edge of the manila. And then smooth it down. Beautiful. Again, this is not a requirement, but I find it's a really helpful technique for blocks that you plan on using a lot. It's a lot easier to trace when they're sitting flat from using the tape instead of the staples. After unstapling the paper from your manila, it's now time to transfer a lot of the markings and information from your paper pattern directly onto the manila using your black and red felt tip pens. And we're going to start by marking our drill holes. We already have tiny holes punctured where the actual drill holes are meant to go, but we also want to circle them with our pen to call extra attention to them. Typically, drill holes on finished patterns are marked with red pen that helps to draw extra attention to them. This is so that when a cutter is cutting the pattern, they can really see where the drill hole is, and they will come to that exact location and make an actual small hole in the fabric of the garment that serves as a cue to the sewer while sewing. We're going to be marking all of the drill holes that belong to darts in red pen. However, we're going to be marking our apex drill hole in black pen. And the reason I like to separate it from the drill holes for the darts is that the apex drill hole is really just a tool that's used for pattern makers. We have the apex marked on blocks because we need to know where it is in the pattern drafting process, but the apex drill hole will never make it further down the line onto a completed pattern, because then the cutter will come along and mark an actual hole in the fabric right over the apex, which is the bust point of the garment. And we really don't want a hole right over the apex in the finished garment for obvious reasons. So I like to come to my apex marking and circle that drill hole in black, and then everything else will be circled in red. The apex is only on your front bodice blocks. So I'm going to come to my front bodice right here. And in case you got a little lost, if this is the 2 dart front bodice, you'll see 3 drill holes marked here. The apex will be the one in the center of the 3. If you're looking at your 1 dart front bodice block, you won't have this upper one, you'll just have 2 drill holes, and the apex will be the upper one. So this is my apex. I'll take my black pen. I like to do a little dot in the center where the actual drill hole was punctured, but then also mark a small circle surrounding it, and just to make it really clear, write the word apex right next to it. And we're going to be sure to mark it on both sides of the block. Once you have the apex marked in black, all of your other drill holes will be ones that should be marked in red. And you'll be sure to mark and circle them in red on both sides of all pieces. After marking all of your drill holes, we now need to mark our grain lines and pattern information on the blocks. But there's something a little funky about how we have to label them. With our drill holes, we came in and just automatically marked all drill holes on both sides of all of the blocks. But when we're marking our grain line and pattern information, how many times we write it will be dependent on the cut number of the piece. Any piece that is a cut 2, like back bodice, back skirt, sleeve, these blocks should have the grain line and the full pattern information written on both sides of the piece, because these are technically 2 separate pattern pieces where if we remove the staples, each individual piece should need its own set of identification. The exception to what I just spelled out about the cut 2 pieces will be anything that is a cut 1 and on the fold. Any piece that is a cut 1, like the front bodice or front skirt, should only have the grain line and pattern information written once, because it is still only 1 pattern piece if we were to unstaple it. To illustrate this a little better, I have a couple half-scale blocks that I'd like to show you that have all the required labeling, but are not secured by staples and tape. So let's say that I'm looking at my back bodice and my front bodice. The back bodice is a cut 2, and if I were to unstaple it, separate them, and lay them out with all the information facing up, you should have 2 separate pattern pieces where each pattern piece has grain line, pattern information, and all drill holes marked. Same thing on both. Grain line, pattern information, and all drill holes marked. On a piece that is a cut 1 and placed on the fold, it's only 1 piece and therefore only needs 1 grain line and 1 pattern info, but you still want all of the drill holes circled on both sides. So if I was to unfold my front bodice block and it's correctly labeled, it should look like this. The cutter should be able to lay the piece out on a single layer of fabric and have every single required drill hole highlighted, but only 1 grain line and 1 pattern information because it is 1 pattern piece. In case you're wondering, well, which side do I mark it on? If I'm going to come to my front bodice block here, do I mark my grain line and pattern information on this side or on this side? The default side that you will always mark your grain line and pattern information should be the garment's right side, as in right versus left. In a garment, when we're defining garment right versus garment left, that should be the right and left of the person who is wearing the garment, not you as the viewer looking at your right and left on somebody else's garment. Therefore, if I was to point out garment right and left on my body as you're looking at me, this is garment right and this is garment left. So I'll hold my block up to the right side of my body, and the side that is facing out on my right side when I'm wearing it will be the side that receives the grain line and pattern information. Moving on to marking our grain line and pattern information, let's start off by demonstrating that on the front bodice. I've already decided that this is my garment right, so this side will receive the grain line and all of the required pattern information. Earlier, when we were discussing transferring information from the paper template onto the manila, we had to do a special process to transfer our sleeve grain line, but anything for the bodice and skirts, we didn't have to transfer because they simply get drawn 1 inch inward from the center front or center back line of the garment. On a front bodice or front skirt, that means 1 inch away from the fold. So to help me do this, I'm going to use my clear drafting ruler. This is a 2 by 18 inch ruler, so if I place the center 1 inch line directly on the fold of my manila, that means the edge of it is now exactly 1 inch away and parallel to my fold. While holding my ruler right here, I'm going to use my black pen and mark a long grain line almost all the way from top to bottom of my piece. Sometimes you'll see grain lines drawn as just a single straight line all the way from top to bottom with no arrows. I prefer the double-ended arrow because I just feel it helps them stand out even more. It really just helps differentiate them from any other stray line on a block or pattern piece. I'm going to go ahead and add the grain lines on my other 2 pieces just so you can see for reference. Remember, on my cut 1 piece, I only have it marked once. I'm not going to flip it over and mark it on the garment left side of the block. This is my back bodice block. This is a cut 2. If I were to remove the staples, we would have 2 separate pattern pieces. Therefore, it needs 2 grain lines, 1 on each side, which basically means 1 on each pattern piece. The long straight line over here is the center back, so I'm going to mark my grain line 1 inch away from it. I'll also flip it over and now mark my grain line on the other side. 2 pattern pieces, 2 grain lines. Our sleeve also needs a grain line, and this was the one that we had to transfer by making tiny pricks with the awl. So I want to look for where my little pinpricks are. If it helps, you could even kind of dot them with your pen just so they're a little easier to see. And then you can take your ruler, line it up to follow your dots, and mark a grain line on both sides of the block because it is a cut 2 piece. After marking your grain lines, now we can go back to each piece and add the pattern information. To know exactly what to write, you're simply going to refer to your original paper templates. So let me grab my front bodice block right here. Taking a look at the information that's on here, let's just kind of discuss it for a second. The first piece of information that you'll always want to write is the name of the piece. So you'll simply write front bodice block. Next is where the block indicates what size it is. All you really need to write is size and the size that your set of blocks is. If you're using one of the multi-size printouts that I have, you'll see the entire size range listed as well as the brand of dress form that I used to create it. You don't have to have this information unless you also have multiple sets of blocks or you want to differentiate that this is the wolf form set as opposed to a different set. And lastly, if you did buy one of my larger sets of blocks that comes with both sleeveless and sleeved fit variations, you probably will want to include that information following your size number. The next line of information is the cut number, and you will just write cut 1. And finally, the last bit of information, I have my logo printed on the template right here, but that is where you can put your own name as the pattern maker. Where are we going to write this? How are we going to write this? Pattern information should always be written pretty close to your grain line. I don't want to come way over here to my side seam waist corner or way up there by the shoulder. It should always be neat and close to the grain line. And you can either write this text in a single tight block of text, or sometimes you'll see the information spread out along the length of the grain line. Both are totally correct, and I'll leave that up to your personal preference, but I'm going to write mine in just a block of text today. And in my hopefully best, neatest penmanship ever, I'm going to write the piece name, which is front bodice block. Next is the size. So I'll write size 6 because that's the size that I cut today. And I will add that this is the sleeveless fit variation of the front bodice block. Next is the cut number. So I will write cut 1. And I like to put this circle around this. Sometimes you'll see the cut number written without the word cut at all. It'll just have the number with a circle around it because the circle itself does sometimes indicate the word cut, but I like to be nice and clear and write it all out. So I write cut 1 with a circle around it. And then lastly, you'll add your pattern maker name. So I will write Vining. And the one additional piece of information that needs to be written on any of your pieces that are a cut 1 and are on the fold is you need to call attention to the fact that this piece is on the fold. So just like on your paper printout here, right along the middle of your fold, you will write the indicator CF for center front, fold, and with these little arrows that say, hey, I'm a fold. And that is our complete labeling for the front bodice block. So remember, this same technique of labeling will be done on any of the blocks in your set that are a cut 1 on the fold. You'll see that the side for garment right has grain line and all of the information and drill holes. If you flip it over to the side that is the garment left, the only thing that should be marked are the drill holes. Moving on to a different type of piece, which will be one that is a cut 2, let's look at the back bodice block. Back bodice block will receive pattern information on both sides, the same way we marked a grain line on both sides, because these are two separate pieces that are just being temporarily held together. I'll come right in here and write back bodice block, size 6, and I believe this is also the sleeveless fit. This is a cut 2 because we have a separate left and right, and your name. And there is no fold indicator written on this piece because there is no fold. We didn't cut it on the fold. But I have to flip it over now and do the same information on the other side. As I mentioned earlier, this is more industry standard practices of labeling blocks. So if these are truly just for home or personal use and they will never be seen by another cutter or sewer that will need to decode them, you can label them however you want. Back bodice, size 6, sleeveless fit, cut 2, and your name. Before we go ahead and wrap this up with talking about how to properly store your completed blocks, I just want to mention how the darts are labeled on your paper template versus what we actually ended up with on the blocks. On industry standard blocks, a dart is only marked by placing a single drill hole exactly 1/2 inch inward from the actual tip or vanishing point of the dart. And the dart legs themselves, which are the lines that actually get stitched on, are never marked on blocks that are used by professional cutters and sewers. So that's the approach that we took here today. I will have a video coming up soon that explores all the finer points of marking and sewing darts, so you'll want to be sure to check that out to see exactly how to mark your darts correctly. But for now, this is actually how they are marked in a commercial pattern room. Now that all the labeling is complete on our blocks, let's talk about how you're going to store these until you're ready to use them to draft your designs. In a commercial pattern room, patterns are typically stored by rabbit punching a hole in each piece and then hanging all the pieces of a pattern together on a single pattern hook. A rabbit punch is this very large, very heavy hole punch that creates a 3/4 inch hole in any of your pattern pieces. I'm going to be showing you how to use this today, but quickly, I'm going to show you an alternative option for those of you who aren't quite ready to invest in a rabbit punch. You can get these boot clips, which are easy to find on Amazon. It's just a hanging hook with a little clip attached, and you can use these to clip all of your blocks together, and then they're able to hang in your pattern closet. But let's go ahead and also see how the rabbit punch is used. The rabbit punch is used to punch a hole in each individual piece, and the default location for this hole should be at the bottom of each piece and roughly centered so that it hangs nice and vertically. And usually the rabbit punch will come with a little stopper that shows you exactly how deep to push the piece in, but the default placement for that stopper is about 2 inches from the edge of the piece. So I'm going to take my rabbit punch, place my piece underneath, and I'm coming into the bottom of the piece about in the center. I'm touching the little stopper, and ta-da, we have a perfect hole. And once you've created a hole in the bottom of all the pieces, you'll simply gather them together and use a pattern hook, which looks like this. Take the toggle at the bottom, bring it through the hole, and you now have a completed set of pattern blocks and are ready to start drafting your designs. The pattern blocks shown in this video, as well as many others ranging in fit and sizes from 2 to 36, are available for purchase in the House of Binding Pattern Boutique at the link below. Thanks for watching, and please consider subscribing to my channel for more tutorials and techniques on all things pattern and sewing related. See you next time.